Hi. This is a video diary recording my response as a survivor of CSA, that's child abuse if you're not aware of the acronym, to the book Nobody's Girl by Virginia Giuffre. My experiences weren't quite like hers. I was never trafficked, but even as a person who just endured garden variety child abuse, it's proven remarkably similar. So in this series, we talk about the impact of abuse on children, both in childhood and in their adult life. In this segment, I'm going to be talking about chapters 6 and 7. I wanted to start today's exploration of the text on page 48, where Virginia is confronted by her dad and Uncle Forrest, who is just a family friend who also exploited her. Uncle Forrest has something he wants to say to you, Dad said, as a bump of adrenaline hit me. I wanted to run, but my feet wouldn't move. He is a man of God now, born again, Dad continued, and it's important that you respect your elders and hear him out. I don't know what I expected to hear from Forrest's ugly mouth. Maybe, I'm sorry I raped you and fucked up your life. Besides, my legs weren't working, so I just stood there, trying to breathe. What happened next would be funny if it weren't so appalling. Forrest stood up and grabbed me by my shoulders, then pushed me to my knees where he'd forced me to be so many times before. This time, though, he was clothed. You need to ask God for forgiveness, he said, sort of bellowing, for what you did with your dad and me. I couldn't believe what I was hearing. As horrible as I felt about myself, some part of me knew that what had happened with Dad and his friend wasn't all my fault. But standing over me now, Forrest just kept on, half yelling, half preaching. Suddenly, I knew what hate tasted like. It was bile in my mouth, bitter, and I had an appetite for it. I hated Forrest, I hated my parents, I hated every living being in Loxahatchee. So, her response was a lot healthier than mine. When people are blaming you for the abuse they inflict on you, very, very common, by the way, not just with children, but also with adults. The correct response isn't what my response was, which was taking the accusations seriously and trying to figure out the correct course of action when on one hand one must obey one's parents, and on the other hand I'm apparently bad for obeying my parents. How are we supposed to balance the commandments of do not commit adultery and respecting the father and mother when they're both there and your parents are asking you to do that? How do you do it? How do you do it? It particularly blew up my brain because I wanted to find a way to reconcile it to make it all good, but it wasn't possible, obviously. And the fact that she also went through being blamed for things, I at least didn't get that at home. I got that from culture and from my personal interest in religion. She got it from the people who did these things to her, which is just hard to comprehend. Actually, no, it's very easy to comprehend. When people do awful things to people and they've been confronted with their own hand in causing harm, when they realize that they did things that have negative moral weight, they often try to deflect as much of that as they can onto other people because it is very terrifying to confront the full extent of our personal evil, especially when we're like those people, those horrible, horrible people. And that's how you get people blaming their victims and putting some of the accountability on them. You see it all the time in the worst possible offenders, possibly because if they didn't feel so inclined to blame others for their actions, they would feel less inclined to commit them. And possibly just because, well, it's so horrible, no one wants to accept it in themselves and actually see it and actually admit, yes, this was all me. That we use religious texts to protect our ego in this way is very counterproductive. If you actually want to grow spiritually, you want to confront all that you really are and integrate or alter that to help you transform into the person you want to be, into the person that you believe your God would want you to be. You don't go up to the people you hurt and say, my hurting you is your fault. No. We can go on. Alright, she discusses a story where she fools around with a boy in high school. And she says, there was something freeing about choosing sex for myself. That said, Ian wasn't anything close to a boyfriend or a first love. At the time, I thought that I was taking back control of my life by lying down in the woods with him. But I see something else now. Pathetically, I was trading on the only part of me that anyone seemed to care about, my body, while my soul remained on the sidelines, ignored. When I was young, and I made this joke well into my 20s, partially as a retrospective and partially in a more present sense way, was that it's easier to have sex than talk. Obviously, Virginia had no trouble talking, but she still was under the same belief I was, that physical affection was the only thing anyone could ever actually want or value from her. And when that is the case, you do tend to have that be a forward part of your personality. You aren't just forward in the traditional sense, but that is also the part of you you put in front, because it is the part of you that is most acceptable, most likable, most lovable. It may be the only part of you that is any of that if you go through these sorts of things. I certainly thought that for a very long time. At least for the vast majority of people I interacted with. It sounds strange if you haven't been through it, but we all define who we are and assess our strengths based upon what other people tell us. If we are repeatedly and systematically invalidated in everything we are and do aside from one thing, we're going to think that one thing genuinely is what's good about us, even when there is, say, cultural programming against being promiscuous. We will think, I certainly thought, yes, that's true for other people, but it's not true for me because I'm not good at those other things. Those other parts of me are not likable or lovable, but that part, everybody likes that part. Even my parents like that part. Well, my stepdad, not my biological parents in any respect, but, and I guess it was the same for her, was her dad. But yeah. When any mother figures or anyone else in your life who isn't harming you doesn't seem particularly interested and seems angry at you and judges you, and when the only affection comes from that front, that's the natural outcome. We see the same theme repeated on page 52, where she describes a time staying at a friend who was a boy's house. He snuck her food, let her sleep there, and she comments on her reaction thusly. I was truly fond of Tony, but this relationship, like so many others, was colored by my desperation. At first we were just friends, but I felt I owed Tony for letting me stay with him, and at this point I saw sex as the primary way to pay my debts. One night we were in his room, and rain was pouring down outside. I was probably 14. I'd find out later that it had been his first time. But yeah, you see from that there's no way he was expecting that. He just appreciated her. He wanted to give her a safe place to be, and because she was uncomfortable accepting goodness, because she didn't really have it in her home, she just had exploitation punctuated by periods of comparative safety and reproach from both of her parents otherwise. As I was discussing a little bit earlier, sex gets pushed in as an essential part of human interaction, as something you must give to pay people back for tolerating your presence and offering you any assistance at all. This also echoes earlier parts in the book where she mentioned that the abuse was punctuated by the good times and you have to get through the icky stuff so you can get back to the good stuff. She basically internalized that the other way as well. If you have good stuff, you must do the icky stuff. They're inextricably bound together because that was the only life she'd known. She'd never been protected and helped without that being asked in return. So if someone is nice to you, you give them that in return. That's how the brain got wired. And that's very common. I definitely came to very similar conclusions when I was her age. And the last part of that chapter on page 53, she talks about her first chapter, Eppinger. I don't remember his first name. What was his first name? Ron Eppinger. He said I should be grateful when he forced me to have intercourse with him because he was teaching me a valuable skill, how to please men. Later, he required that I watch porn so that I'd understand what sex is about. First, trying to learn about sex by watching porn is just, it's a very bad idea. But I'm gonna set that aside for a minute, because what I really wanted to talk about was this person also is repeating that same pattern that she had learned through life, that sex is a valuable skill, and it's held up as the most important skill for her, one she should be grateful for being taught about, and one that is absolutely necessary. This is only going to reinforce her preconceived notions, the emotional lizard brain learning that sex is what people want from her. And she has to be good at that. She has to be open with that. She has to do as much of that as possible in order to make people accept her and tolerate her and keep her safe and warm and fed. Which sucks. I never had anything like that. I actually obsessively studied sex, technique, anatomy, mechanisms of action long before I had any consensual activity, because I knew the value of sex. I overestimated the value of it because of my history. And therefore I wanted to be good at it right away to make sure that I didn't displease people in the only way that I ever hoped to be valued. Yes, that does have long-term benefits. Her experience, not so much. Like, especially making her watch porn and pleasing a man being the focus, that's not going to make sex enjoyable for anyone who actually cares what their partner is feeling. And most people care about their partner, so they do care. They want people to do things that they enjoy, that cause mutual gratification preferentially. Trying to please just one person there is going to lead to bad or mediocre sex for anyone who actually cares what you're doing. I am glad that I understood this. I am heartbroken that she was taught so differently, and so explicitly taught so differently. I'm going to start on page 58. I was unwanted, so I acted like a girl no one would want. A captive for so long, I had no idea how to harness my freedom. So, there are a couple different ways you can go when you're treated in ways that create these ideas. She reacted by acting out, but I'd argue that even the way that I went with things, which was people-pleasing, which was being small, which was retreating from everything, was also acting like someone that no one would want, because it wasn't engaging earnestly and equally with the world. And people who love people, and there are millions and billions, I think there are probably billions. I mean, there are billions of them out there. They don't want the scared and obedient. They want the person who chooses them and is happy to choose them and is delighted in them. And that also brings them delight simultaneously. Neither her method of coping and acting in response, nor my method of coping and acting in response did that. Both created severe disturbance in how we interacted, both professionally and socially in the world. Later on that same page, page 58, she talked about a friend named Michael. She says that one thing led to another, but I had no romantic feelings for him. I just didn't know how to set boundaries with men who wanted things from me. Everything we've said previously should explain how and why that happens, so none of us are shocked. Boundaries are actually really poorly understood nowadays. People talk about them, but they talk about them as though they're things you tell other people to do. That's wrong. A boundary is when you decide what you will do and you communicate that to someone else, and if they violate that boundary, you enforce the consequence. Often this means withdrawing yourself from the relationship. If you say no and that no isn't respected, you don't give them another chance to violate your no, you just leave. Otherwise, you have tacitly set a boundary that you don't want, that is further away from what you said you wanted through your actions. Not blaming anyone for that, obviously. there are lots of complex reasons we fall into these behavioral patterns, but healthy boundaries always involve actions you take in response to what you say and tell others that you will do and that you will allow them to do. It makes sense that she wouldn't feel comfortable setting boundaries, particularly on the one thing people would want her for. You'd be terrified that no one would want you in any respect after that. I know I personally had trouble setting boundaries in any respect because I went the hide route and then I moved into the people-pleasing route. I really envy how forthright and how much Virginia spoke out to defend herself. She seems to berate herself for when she did give in, for when she did let her trauma impact her actions in the book. I don't think she means to. But that's what I feel reading it. Maybe I'm projecting. I know I definitely blamed myself for how I acted for a very long time. But these are natural consequences of events. We are shaped by our environment, particularly when we're young. You can't learn boundaries if they're not modeled for you. You certainly can't learn how to set boundaries if your boundaries are routinely and systematically violated as you're growing up. These things are taught. These skills are learned. They don't come naturally. And she continues on page 58. Michael asked me to marry him, offering his grandma's ring. I couldn't say yes. I was just 16, 2 years short of Florida's age requirement without parental consent. But I didn't clearly say no either, or tell him the truth, that I wasn't in love with him. Years later, he'd say he believed that I'd accepted his proposal. I could understand why. For all the changes I wanted to make, it seemed I was paralyzed. Instead of choosing my own path, I was letting life happen to me. Wow, that one's that one hits too close to home. I also explicitly accepted a proposal because I was afraid of what would happen if I didn't, and he seemed good enough, certainly the best that I would ever manage to attain. I never actually went through with it. Mostly because it just seemed wrong to actually marry someone who I knew from personal experience was physically abusive. I didn't recognize the emotional or mental or financial time, but yeah. I'm frustrated by myself. I'm frustrated that that's what I did. It wasn't kind to me. It wasn't kind to him. Yes, he had issues, but he's not entirely at fault. Well, I guess no one's entirely at fault. We're all products of where we come from. But I wish I had known enough about the healthy ways to be to not make that mistake. That's part of why I make content like this when I do. Because I want people to understand the causes and the effects so they can recognize them in themselves and others and either help themselves out or help someone else they see who might be dealing with similar issues by understanding themselves and by choosing the tools and using the resources necessary to move beyond these patterns of pain. Okay, on page 61 in the same chapter, chapter 7, she's talking about her first days in Mar-a-Lago and learning the rules from the 65-page employee handbook. It was quite rigid, but she says, I wasn't annoyed by the rules and regulations. Far from it. Their formality made me feel good, as if working at a place that took itself so seriously might make the world take me seriously too. And that really made me smile. A lot of the root of my love of religion is searching for a way of life that was different than I found at home, because I recognized that was bad, that wasn't what I wanted, I needed to find something else, but I didn't really know where to look aside from religion. She found it in the regulations of her job, at least in a partial and temporary sense. I found it in holy books and in lists of virtues and sins. And far from it feeling restrictive, it felt like the guidance I had always lacked growing up, and she clearly also lacked that guidance. I don't think most people really want to be miscreants and delinquents. They want to be respected, loved, understood, appreciated, which everyone knows you don't get by just acting out, by hiding. You get it by doing things that people appreciate. And really, for her, this set of rules, this carefully delineated handbook, may have been one of the first places she had that kind of guidance. I know the religions I looked into were one of the first times I had that kind of guidance, and it was so needed, so wanted. Like, I know everyone says kids need guidance. It's a cliche at this point. They need boundaries, they need structure. But it's true, and if we don't find it at home, we will find it elsewhere. The first place Virginia found it was at Mar-a-Lago, with their strict rules of self-presentation and behavior. I found it in religion. Both have certain limitations, but they offer something. And people will grasp and grab and be grateful for even partial assistance, partial guidance, even when they need a great deal more than that. Okay, describing working at Mar-a-Lago. I marveled at how peaceful everyone seemed to feel within its walls. My duties, making tea, tidying the bathrooms, restocking towels, kept me just outside the inner sanctum of the massage rooms, but still I could see how relaxed clients looked when they emerged. Whenever possible, I questioned the massage therapists about what they did and how they'd learned to do it. I seized on the idea that, with the right training, I could eventually make a living by helping others reduce stress. Maybe, I thought, their healing would fuel my own. For the first time in my life, I allowed a flicker of hope to build inside me. After all I had been through, I believed I might finally leave my abusive past behind. This is also extremely common for people from dodgy backgrounds. It's a cliche that most therapists have mental health issues and come from rough backgrounds, but it's also true. One of the reasons we develop an interest in these sorts of studies in helping people is that we needed help and didn't get it. It's very, very, very common to treat people the way we needed to be treated, the way we still need to be treated. My theory is that it works by deeply informing us at the core of our being of what at least some people need. Our own pain informs us of the pain other people may have, and because we feel that so acutely, we are hyper aware of that pain in others. And it's as natural to want to relieve that pain in others as it is to relieve the pain in ourselves. It's also easier. We often have a much harder time looking at our own issues, understanding our own problems, than we have seeing and understanding the pain and problems of others. We're just too close to it for ourselves, so we exercise those skills with others. If we're lucky, this turns into a reciprocal relationship where we help them and they help us. The professional contexts, like massage and therapy and psychiatry, don't have that two-way relationship going on. But there's nothing inherently wrong with doing that as well. You just don't want that to be the only avenue to exercise things, because it does cut off that possibility of reciprocity and being healed by your own impulses to heal the wounds that you have. Okay. So, that's it for chapters 6 and 7. I'm keeping it to more reasonable sizes, I hope. And if you would like to continue with the series, you can. If you would like to go back to the first one in this series, you can also do that. I'm just being awkward at this point. I might as well close it. Do what thou wilt shall be the whole of the law. Love is the law, love under will. I stuck my fingers in my cup. It was very cold. It was very cold.